Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us again on day 2 of the 20th anniversary Streaming Media East. Everyone have a good day yesterday? I know it's still early yet. I'll take that as a strong yes, solid yes. Once again, we've got co-located events going on along with Streaming Media East. We've got the live streaming summit. That's in the Morgan Room, which is it's in that middle hallway that you can access off the exhibit hall. Today we also have the Video Marketing Power Summit, which we're running for the first time, and that's in Murray Hill East. The tech track will be in here. The business track will be in Murray Hill West, pretty much like it was yesterday. As always, check your program for details. Download the app, which has all the details as well, and also gives you the opportunity to rate sessions. I believe it's on page 22 of your program, where you can find the instructions for downloading that app. We love the feedback. Please let us know what you like, what you didn't like. There will be a post-event survey that gets emailed out to everyone as well. Take a couple minutes and answer that. That would be really helpful to us to make sure that we're giving people what you need, and you'll surely think of some things that we haven't even thought of yet. So the exhibit hall is open till 4 p.m. today. I did it again. I didn't introduce myself. For those of you who weren't here yesterday morning, I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the VP and Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media Magazine, streamingmedia.com, and I'm the conference chair. So I put together most of the sessions today with help from my co-chairs. Troy Dreyer put together the Video Marketing Power Summit. Once again, Jose Castillo in the back of the room there is my right-hand person. He calls himself the Streaming Media East Cruise Director, so you are welcome to call him Julie if you'd like. And you know, between him and the other people with a purple staff badge, we can answer any of your questions. The event goes until 5 p.m. today. We've got a great closing keynote at 4:15 p.m. today with Rachel Burke from Google. She's going to be talking about the future of OTT, particularly focusing on subscription services, and she's got a wealth of experience with the Android store as well. So that's going to be great, and it will also include a giveaway. We will be giving away a LiveView Solo and a Sling Studio. That's been given to us by LiveView, so I thank them for their support. It's a package worth $3,500, but you must be present to win. So come to the keynote, and we'll be giving that away at the end of the day. So without further ado, my next guest really does need no introduction. I mean, Netflix has changed fundamentally the way that we watch TV, that we watch video, and they've been out at the forefront of almost every major technological change and major creative changes that we've seen in the world of television. And Chris Fetner, the Global Director of Post-Production Partnerships, has put together a terrific panel of people who work at and with Netflix to bring you the content that you want to watch and achieve the vision that the creators have when they make the content, and make sure that vision gets translated to your screen. So with that, I welcome Chris Fetner.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say welcome and thank you for allowing Netflix to participate in this event. I think this is our 3rd or 4th time that we've been involved, so it's always fun to come back and say hello to everybody. I thought that it might be fun just to give a quick introduction before I bring up all the folks that are involved in the creative process of making content available on Netflix. So I usually just start with this quick slide, which is updated quarterly, which is Netflix by the numbers. So we just recently announced that we have 125 million members globally. We're in 190 countries. And this is one that I always have to kind of scratch my head and pinch myself to know that it's true, but we do about 140 million hours a day of streaming. We also are on pretty much every device that's connected to the internet, so it's about 1,000 different devices that we have to make sure that our service is optimized for. And this year, we'll spend about $8 billion on content. And to date, we've won, so these are not nominations, the nomination list would be much bigger, but we've won 43 Primetime Emmys and 2 Oscars for content that was created specifically for Netflix. And I also thought it would be fun to do a little trip down memory lane. So if you look in 2006, actually Amazon launched their Unboxed service, which was their first streaming service that ultimately became Amazon Prime. So it was instant video and then Prime. And then 2007 was a really big year for streaming. So you saw the launches of the Netflix streaming platform, Hulu, and the BBC iPlayer, all in that same year. And then 2010, HBO Go. which was, of course, the tethered service for the HBO cable distribution. In 2011, Tencent in China launched, so that's obviously a very big addressable market that got its first streaming platform. 2014, you saw iFlix, a very big platform that's in Asia. And then today, there are literally hundreds of different OTT streaming platforms globally. So I think it's safe to say that streaming is pretty well ingrained in the world global culture and the entertainment consumption, and you'll continue to see lots of different growth in those areas. So I want to talk a little bit about how streaming is different than broadcast or even theatrical. So we were the first ones to launch a full 4K service in 2014 with our House of Cards Season 2. So that was really the first show that was shot on a 4K camera, mastered in a 4K workflow, and delivered on our platform in 4K. 2015, Amazon launched HDR10, which was their first version of high dynamic range. And I believe it was Mozart in the Jungle was the title, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Very quickly on the heels of that, we launched our HDR version, which was Dolby Vision, in 2016. And that was, we actually launched with 100 titles. So we went back and regraded some shows, and then there were some shows that were actually in our post-production pipeline at that time, and we went ahead and mastered them in high dynamic range. Which we'll talk about today on the panel. In 2017, in June, we launched a movie called Okiya, which is about genetically modified pigs, and it was a Korean movie, and that was our first movie that was done in Dolby Atmos. So that was actually done in 4K, Dolby Atmos, and Dolby Vision. So it really was the first fully next-gen title that we launched. 2017, we launched interactive titles. So we launched 2 kids interactive titles that allow kids to kind of work their way through the narrative. They get to make decisions along the way, and we saw some very positive outcomes from that in consumption. And so we're continuing to launch more of these interactive titles, specifically in the kids market, but we are looking at them for live action and adult content or maybe teen content. And then I'm just going to go ahead and throw the gauntlet down and say that I do believe that streaming will get to Rec 2020, which is a wider color space than you see today, probably before any other platform. And the point of all of these things is that streaming allows for faster innovation. We do not have the limitations of a distribution path like cable television or satellite distribution. We really rely on the internet, which today, probably in the last 5 minutes, has already gotten a little bit better, just in the time that I've been talking to you, because everybody is optimizing the internet. And then we also work with consumer devices, which again have an annual cycle of improvement. At every CES, consumer devices are going to be better. That's how they continue to sell products. So the pace of innovation for streaming is very quick, and that's why. Today, you're seeing all of these innovations, which, by the way, with the exception of a little bit of HDR, you're not seeing much in the broadcast space for any of these things. And so streaming and all of you that are involved in streaming are going to see a leapfrogging of experience where you really, in the streaming world, will be able to offer a much, much better experience for people that want to consume video content. So with that, I want to talk just a little bit about using these tools, because it's great to have these tools, but if you don't expose them and roll them out correctly, then they won't really get used by the creative community. And the first thing that I'll say is just a big part of it is making it known to the creatives what the technology does. I remember when we were talking about Okiya, we met with the director, who's a very famous director, probably one of the most famous directors in Korea, and we were talking about HDR. We had a couple phone conversations with him about HDR, and he was fine with 4K, but he didn't really understand HDR. And so we had Dolby come in, and we got a special monitor, and we set it up in a conference room, and we showed him some before and after shots that were graded in HDR, and immediately I asked him, I said, okay, well, so what do you think of this? And he said, let's do it. it was really just about seeing it and understanding how it could impact his storytelling process. So it's really about helping them understand that and understand how they can use it for the storytelling process. It's also new to them. And anybody who's been involved in a production knows it's a very pressured process. There's deadlines and there's money constraints and there's a lot of things that really push on the process. And so you need to support them and help them get through that process, especially because it's not a mature process. So a lot of times we're sort of teaching the post supervisor, we're teaching the directors of photography, we're teaching the directors, we're teaching the DI finishing house. We're kind of teaching everybody in the path how to do it at the same time and helping them work through that. And so it's really important that you support them because it's an experiment. It's not settled ground. It's still sort of very exploratory. And so you have to support them through that process. The other thing that you have to do, and my team spends a lot of time doing it, is to make sure that the ecosystem is defined and well poised to make them successful. So are there enough tools on the market? Are the tools in the right set of tools that the DPs and the colorists are going to be using? Are they in Pro Tools if we're going to be doing a Dolby Atmos mix in audio? And so all of these things are, the whole ecosystem has to mature in order to be able to support these new next generation experiences. And then the last thing is, once they do all this work, it's incumbent on the streaming platforms to ensure that their creative vision, what they saw in the DI rooms and what they heard in the sound mixing rooms, is actually delivered as best it can be to the consumer. So for those of you that were here yesterday, you probably heard my colleague Ann Aaron talk about how we look at compression and compression algorithms. All of that is done to make sure that we have as close to artistic intent as possible on every device. There's thousands of devices that we have to support. We have to try to do our best across that entire supply chain and that entire experience. So with that, I have some people who I'm really come from a technical background, and so I asked some creative folks and some folks that are really in the trenches on all of these things to join me. So I'll just ask them to kind of come up as I call them out. So Manuel Billeter, if you could come on up. Manuel has been working in the field of film and television in New York since 2002. He worked his way up from a camera assistant to an operator to now director of photography. After shooting a few episodes of Law & Order, he moved to CBS, the CBS show Person of Interest, and now he's working on several Netflix originals. He worked on Orange is the New Black, the entire Marvel slate, so Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, The Punisher, and even a little bit of Daredevil, I believe. Right. So thank you, Manuel, for joining us. Anthony Raffaele is going to come up, and Anthony is the supervising finishing artist at Technicolor-PostWorks. He primarily grades features and episodic television. His most recent projects are Raptor, Wonder Wheel, Super Troopers 2, and Strong Island. So welcome, Anthony. Justin Holt. Justin began his entertainment career in post-production at Weller Grossman in Los Angeles and has worked almost every job in post-production. That may mean that he wasn't good at some of them, and that's why he's doing this now. I don't know. He's been an editor, a colorist, post supervisor. 2015, he joined Runway, the Post Group, as director of post-production, overseeing client relations, technical workflows, and financial health of the department. He's been with Netflix since 2017 as a manager of post-production. Michael Kadenacy is the president and managing director of Eurofins Digital Services, formerly known as My Media. He's a leader in third-party quality control and digital content sector. He's been a pioneer in quality control and technical analysis. And during his 25 years, he's had stints at all the major studios, including Walt Disney, Paramount, Fox, and Sony. And last but not least, Zack Tucker is joining us from Harbor Pictures. He's a feature, film, and commercial editor and director. He founded Harbor Pictures in 2010 and has grown it into the largest post-production footprint in New York, offering top-tier artistry, robust services from production finishing to feature films, episodic, and commercials. So thank you all. Welcome. So yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. This is my good side. No, just kidding. I have no good side. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to kind of jump right in. And first of all, for people in the room that may not know, What exactly is color grading? That was not on the question.
No. So color grading is the process of taking the footage that's shot and then tweaking it and manipulating it to make it look the way the creatives intend it to look, which can include creating a specific look similar to like something like films like The Matrix or 300 or something like that, or just making it look plain, not plain, but something that looks cinematic and normal, which then you shape with specific windows and keys to manipulate it and make it perfect or perfect.
Perfect as intended. Manuel, how important is color grading to a director of photography?
I was just going to say that it's an incredibly important step in what we do. Also because it's incredibly creative. You can tweak a lot of things. You can enhance a lot of things, and you can do that, in the comfort of a beautiful, climate-controlled suite. And you don't have, you're not in the trenches when you're shooting on set. Sometimes it can get very hectic, and you don't have time to set an extra flag. You don't have time to maybe put some extra, colored gels on your lights. So I know now that I can do that with the colorist in grading. And it's a huge time saver for me on set, and it's also I know, and I'm always looking forward to sitting in with the grader to make it better, just to make it look better.
So actually, Manuel, I'll start off with you a little bit on sort of next generation content. So really, we at Netflix think of next generation content as 4K, Dolby Vision, and Dolby Atmos. But also we are aspiring to wider color gamut, which we haven't really been able to get to just quite yet because of the device ecosystem. But what was it like for you when you made the jump from shooting sort of HD to 4K and then also the next jump to HDR? What was that like for you? How did it impact the way you thought about the work you did?
It's always exciting, being exposed to new technology that you want to learn about because it's kind of like a pathway to the future. However, a lot of things also didn't really change. What's at the core of what I'm trying to do is to sit with the showrunner or with the director and really get at the core of the story, of the narrative, and and the story. It's just being delivered in a different format now, but stories have been around for forever and ever. So it really starts for me. It starts with the word and what's on the page, and figure out a strategy and stylistically how to shoot it, how to frame it, what kind of rhythm in editing to use to enhance the core story and its attributes. But now with 4K, of course, then gives you a whole new clarity and immersiveness that at first I wasn't quite sure if that's if this is going to be on my side or not. But I found out that with the right combination of lenses and lighting, and it just gives you a very immersive picture, and also it helps in post starting out with a better quality picture than the other way around. But in the end, I think it's let's not forget, it's not just about the technology. It's about I think the eye is as important as, or more important as, or the approach, the attitude is really what makes like a show or a piece stand apart from others, because everybody shoots 4K now, or almost everybody. Yeah. So it's the approach is the most the most individually important step. HDR, again, it came in Iron Fist season 1. It was the first time that Marvel went into HDR, and it's again it's new. It was radically different. But you learn to use it. You learn how to protect your image, how to shape it, and here we are.
So it's been ultimately a new set of tools. It's expanded your set of tools.
It's definitely an expanded set of tools, and it has better color reproduction. It's it's you have to learn it because I mean also I'm not monitoring in HDR on set, so I have to go to the lab and see the SDR and also the Rec 2020 and the Rec 709 side by side, so I can see then from working on set. How does the Rec 709 image? How will it look in HDR? And then of course, we do the grading and whatnot. But it was definitely a learning curve. Like protecting the highlights so they wouldn't, because HDR can get quite bright.
Yeah.
If overused. So it was definitely something that I had to look out for in this new process.
Yeah. Anthony, I'll kind of ask you the same question. I mean, what were the challenges with it, particularly HDR, as a colorist?
I mean, to kind of champion what Manuel said, we're storytellers. You're trying to push the narrative forward and enhance the parts that you really want to stand out in the story, in the image. And when you're going through that, having new tools, having a higher fidelity, having a greater latitude helps. It helps you to block out things. It helps you to bring down things. It helps you to add focal points to certain things. And what I would say is a higher resolution like 4K enables greater detail. It enables things that maybe the viewer doesn't necessarily see, but someone on a technical end like myself is able to isolate things better or in a quicker fashion. So resolution is really important. And then something like HDR, which one of my clients asked me what the deal is, and I said, well, it's like going from a box of 64 crayons to 120. So you have a greater amount. You've exponentially increased the amount of light that you have, and with that comes extra contrast. It gives you more finesse in low-level shadows, more finesse in high-level brightness. So you can grab. You don't have to pick whether you want more detail in the shadows or more detail in the highlights. You could actually isolate the brightness levels and bring back those clouds and have these great little details in the shadow at the same time. So for storytelling, that creates a whole nother level of, do we want to see those clouds? Do we want to see those shadows? Where am I focusing the viewer's eye? And that's what you get out of having a greater amount of detail and fidelity. And HDR brings that. HDR brings that, 4K brings that. And I guess I would say that for the most part, it's only enhanced my storytelling ability. And you're actually using now what the camera shoots. The exposure on the camera is so much, but you've been looking through this small window of what the detail that you have in the actual negative. And now you're able to actually see a greater portion of that. So it's been eye-opening for a lot of creative people where they're like, oh, I didn't know that there was detail in the sky. I'm so excited, let's bring that in. Or I've sat and had someone say, what's in that window? I didn't know there was someone in that window. Let's blow that out. It's taking my eye away from the narrative. So in that sense, it's helped, and it's also been a learning curve for everyone.
Right. Interesting. Justin, how do when you have conversations, because you have to have budget conversations and schedule conversations, and so when you sort of pitch 4K and HDR to creative folks that are doing projects on behalf of Netflix, how do those conversations go? What are their concerns?
I would say that right now it's been an education. 4K, HDR, Atmos, all those three roads to technology have been an education for everybody. The biggest pitch is like everybody's concerned about time, they're concerned about budget. I think the more people do it, the more we push it, the cheaper it'll get, the faster it'll get. Right now, I liken the HDR to the Best Buy test, and that's how I pitch it to creatives, being like, just look at these two side by side. Once you see them side by side, I really don't know. Anybody who's looked at it so far has ever been like, oh, I really like that SDR better.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever said that to me yet, and I don't anticipate that to be the case. So once they see the creative vision, what they have, and they realize that we're going to work with the vendors, we're going to work with their post-soups, we're going to work with the team to reduce the overall cost, they see the uptick in creative, and they look at the cost of that, and they're like, this is a no-brainer.
So it's worth the investment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's been worth the investment on a wide variety of shows we've had. I mean, Chef's Table's been a great example of that.
Yeah.
I think food looks fantastic in HDR, and if you haven't seen it, watch it and see if you're not hungry afterward.
Right. You might reach for it, right? Yeah, right.
I mean, I want to second that. I mean, it really is so much more immersive, especially when you see them side by side. How immersive and how three-dimensional almost that image looks in HDR. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember reading that there was a study that they actually hooked up electrodes to people's brains and looked at brainwave activity when they watched something in HD and when they watched it in 4K. And they can't explain it, and they haven't, unfortunately, done more studies in it, but there was definitely more brainwave activity when people were watching the 4K material. And one of the hypotheses was it's just more data to have to kind of watch. But I don't really, I only remember just sort of reading it in passing, but it was really interesting that there was more just stuff going on in our brains when we watched 4K, which was interesting, yeah. So Zach, as a facility, you have to kind of manage a business, and most of these things come with more CapEx and they're harder to support and things like that. How has it changed the kind of configuration of your facilities? And just it's sort of like the bottom line, has it been a good thing or a loss leader, or is it something that you just have had to kind of grin and bear it as it matures?
Yeah, I would say that we spend a lot of time. We're very artist driven, and so when the artists demand it, that's where we go. I would not say it's been we've been terribly successful at being able to charge for it. That's just not been super feasible. What it has been, though, is that because we spend a lot of time at that edge, the artists, the cinematographers, the producers want to be there because they know we're playing with it all the time. And the reason they're in the business is to push the envelope creatively all the time. And so it's more been like, we're a playground where they want to come, and we invest in the kit so that we can do it. I would not say we have a ton of success with the financiers and the producers saying, okay, we just had to invest in, significant more technology and being able to charge much more for it. Look, there's an extra pass sometimes, so we'll do a little extra, if there's an HDR pass. But I wouldn't say it's been like a financial windfall.
It's not a premium as a service. It's not really a premium.
It's that, but if you don't do it, then you're not a premium spot.
Right.
And
okay.
if you want to be doing, the top tier work, we're all in this. Yeah, there's a financial aspect to what we do, but it's not what drives us on a day-to-day basis. What really drives us is wanting to be involved in the most intriguing projects and with the most intriguing creatives and the most intriguing cinematographers, and so we're in it with them. And we also think very much of the long term. We're not, this is gone are the days of making quite a lot of money on any specific project. You're really trying to look for down the road, like how are we building an ecosystem that allows the creatives to play in a way that they can't play somewhere else.
Right. Have you been noticing though that like if you had to put a percentage on sort of where 4K and HD was in terms of how many projects you have in the door, say a year ago versus today, what percentage? What's
in terms
the
of
split?
4K?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I don't know any projects that aren't shooting 4K pretty much, or 3.2 anyway.
Yeah.
And the majority of them are finishing 4K. Some of the smaller independent feature films, maybe they'll still finish 2K, but pretty much everything is finishing at 4K.
Uh-huh. And how about HDR?
I would say probably 50-50 HDR, but what happens is, it used to be similar to Atmos early days that they would still do, that still the SDR pass would be the hero, and then they would do a trim to HDR. And now the colorists, I think Anthony will probably agree, are really almost invariably grading in HDR, and then doing sometimes they'll do a trim down to SDR, but they find things in the cinematographer and the colorist find things when they're grading HDR that they didn't see before. And so they often will, when they still have worked in a mode where they've used SDR as their hero, they'll go back and fix the SDR. And even if they're doing theatrical grading, when we're grading on projection, they're often having an HDR monitor up while they're grading the theatrical pass because they see things in the HDR that they're not seeing even in 4K projection. And so they're using those to play off each other.
Interesting.
I would agree with that. I recently just did a feature, and we did our SDR pass into projection, and then we wheeled in the HDR monitor to watch it down and regraded the SDR.
Oh, really?
After that fact,
Based on what you were
based
seeing?
on what we were seeing in the HDR, because we were like, oh well, we have a little bit more detail here, or we could probably get a little bit better blacks here,
Yeah.
and we noticed so much more when we looked
So
at it in HDR.
will that change your future workflow then, so that you would just
Yeah.
do the HDR first?
I think I think right now, because of the technology and the way it is, where it's like a moving target on the process, and we're kind of feeling it all out because we have so many different deliverable methods at this point. You know, projection, HDR monitors, SDR monitors, 4K monitors, HD monitors. You know, we're trying to hit so many different targets at this point. But I think if we're mastering to a hero grade in HDR, we're future-proofing ourselves, and you know.
Agreed. Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, a hero grade is like
Yeah,
the,
sorry
the
about
one that
that.
everybody likes the best, I guess. Or
I would say there is a bit of a pioneer tax around this too.
For sure.
So to speak to Zach's point about the financial obligations, I was a vendor delivering to Netflix, and there's certainly a pioneer tax to invest in the gear. That being said, with all of the titles we have coming out and all of the other studios coming out, there have been advances in technology, as Chris pointed, that will eventually make this better and better and cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah.
A good example is the controls in the Dolby CMU would allow you to do that hero pass, hopefully at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's just going to keep getting better and better. The ability to create an IMF for us in HDR used to have to use a really expensive tool, and now Resolve has it built in.
Yeah.
So there are advances in technology that will consistently make the pricing go down too, to make it a little bit easier on the vendors to have a wider variety of shows come through the door and do it cheaper.
yeah,
The dividend on that pioneer tax for us as a facility, though, is that it creates a barrier to market for other people trying to get into it. Because even by the time those prices do come down, we've got the experience, you know, and we understand
sure.
it better than
I agree.
anybody
Yeah.
else.
You're relied on as the expert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah. It's always it's sort of known as the first mover's advantage, right? And so with it comes some liability, but you have this advantage above everybody else because knowledge is really very valuable, right? That's sort of the investment you made was
Especially
in
in what
knowledge,
we
not
do.
in hardware. Yeah.
Especially in what we do, because it's so technology based.
Yeah.
You know, 3-4 years from now, we'll have another panel where we're talking about something else.
Yeah.
You know, and that constant change is what really drives the industry. You know.
Yeah, I think it's true too when you see, particularly for folks that are brave with these new experiences, like yourself and Manuel and other really creative people, because a director might see the work that Manuel did and say, I want to do HDR, I want it to kind of look like Luke Cage, get me the guy that did Luke Cage.
Yeah.
And because you guys have delivered, you've been, you know, the proof is in the pudding when it comes to these things, and you guys have shown that you can work with these tools, and so therefore you become very desirable when you know something that most people don't know, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
It was actually my introduction to Zach. Was, hey, I need somebody good in New York. Somebody give me Zach's number. So it does pay dividends, and it will continue to.
yeah. So Michael, for you have made a very long career out of finding people's mistakes.
Thanks.
And
Always
you,
the bearer
Michael.
of bad news.
And I mean, how are the mistakes different with 4K and HDR, and you know, what has it meant to your process and the types of things you find and how you find them?
Well, I think the way we approach quality control hasn't changed. And you know, to go back to what Manuel and Anthony were saying is, you know, from what they're trying to create on a creative level, I learned early on in my career that our job in quality control is to ensure what the producer's intent was, you know. So even though it might feel like it to you guys sometimes that we're calling you out on your mistakes, really we're just trying to make sure that it looks the way you want it to look. Because if we're doing our job right, then the consumer, they never know we were even there, you know. So, but the kind of things that we're seeing bigger, that are more obvious now, is just like with the higher resolutions and the wider color gamut, you know, we're having to, our operators are looking at these on larger and larger screens. That's lot of real estate for quality control operators to cover in terms of the raster. So dead pixels come out a lot more prominently, and we can automate those kinds of things to catch those kinds of problems. But we kind of consider quality control an art form in itself, and we're looking for things that are not going to be easily automated. Cutbacks are the same, that there's consistency between episode to episode and overall color and how it looks. But there are more and more tools coming out, and at a baseline, we don't want a format to be perfect, because then we're out of a job. We like it when it doesn't work quite right. So we're at our most valuable when new technologies are coming out, and that we're helping kind of discover what those issues are.
Have you ever read a QC report and I'd be curious to know what your thoughts were?
Yeah. I've seen numerous QC reports, and they are very interesting.
Would you like that? Would you like to have a word with Michael after?
No. I'm not. Now that I know who he is, I'm going to just lean this way and try not to look in that direction. But no, I mean, honestly, there's been things that I've seen in QC reports that I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I would have been embarrassed had that gone out.
Right.
Do
you think that it's, one of the things, there's a great story, I didn't think it was great at the time, but I like sharing it now, which is I got a call from a really angry showrunner that we had failed a show because it had a drone in the rear view mirror of a car. So there was a shot where the car, it was a period piece, that this particular episode was set in the 50s. And it was a shot where someone drove away from the main actress, and in the rear view, you were supposed to just see this car kind of driving away, and in the rear view mirror, you could see the drone that was kind of following the car, right, as it went away. And this producer called me, and he's like, hey, are you serious? Like, you're gonna make me paint that out and take it to VFX and everything?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
yeah. Yes. I said, no, I'm not going to make you. Michael is much bigger than me, and he's going to make you do it. But no, actually, I said, well, look, on a 70-inch screen, it actually takes up about 4 inches of real estate, and it's very pronounced. And a DJI-inspired drone doesn't look like any bird that I'm familiar with, And so, we said, look, it takes people out of that moment. It takes them out of 1950 in that moment, and that's really a distracting thing, and especially with very good resolution on a very large screen. If it was a film being projected on a 30-foot screen, it absolutely would be flagged. Yeah. And so I just think that we are escalating to that standard, which I think is a good thing, because people continue to get bigger and bigger screens, and they tend to get more and more resolution, and so something that maybe would fly today won't fly 5 years from now, and our shows tend to be, people find our shows down the road. They may not have watched that, we have that show in perpetuity, so they may not get around to watching it till 6 years from now, and they have a 40-inch screen in their house, whatever.
I was going to mention that, like, the in perpetuity worldwide thing is such a big difference from a lot of the people that I'm working with now, because they're used to a linear world, like, wait for it to broadcast once, and who's going to catch that 5 frames? Nobody's going to catch it on the first broadcast. If we need to fix it for the rebroadcast, we might. But now that we have it on in perpetuity and we translate to 24 languages, fixing something's not so easy. So we do this QC process way early on before it goes on service. We want it to be as perfect as possible.
Yeah. So Manuel, this next question is kind of for you. What's been your experience when you deal with directors and showrunners and post supervisors when they're maybe in the suite with you and they're seeing HDR maybe for the first time? What's generally been their reaction?
Well, I haven't had the good fortune of sitting with the director in the DI, but sometimes with the showrunner. And the first time it takes because it's so different from what they have been seeing on set, what they have been seeing on the Avid. It's just a new quality of image. So at first there's always a little bit of a hesitation, a surprise, let's say, where like, oh, I didn't know that this was all like that, or that this could look like this. So it takes, I mean, but after the initial surprise, usually, and you start just like looking at that image as is and accept it as what it could be, then it's there's usually it's very welcome. But it is initially because our brain has been used to seeing it in a certain way, seeing it in a new way, in a new light, so to speak, is a bit jarring at first because it's not what you expected. But once you just look at that, you see the beauty of it and the depth of it and the potential of it. So it's been widely accepted, after an initial hesitation, but just because it's new, it's like trying a food that is new, like trying like two flavor combinations that you didn't expect, but once you get a taste for it, I think it works.
Yeah, and would you say that your general preference is to shoot in HDR now too?
Well, I mean, the camera shoots the way it shoots, so it's HDR in that sense is more like a post process, or it's been developed in post, if you want to use an analogy. But look, I think as I said in the beginning, and also I have been echoed, like we're storytellers. Some stories or some projects maybe don't need HDR. Some stories might work better if they're shot on Super 16 millimeter film, and not finish in HDR. Others very much require the novelty and the added tools that HDR delivers. I think again, we just have to step back and always just look at what is the project, what is the story that's being told, what's the narrative that is on the page here, and then choose the right tool, the right way, the right method to best serve that particular story.
Okay.
Yeah, would you ever see Saving Private Ryan put out in HDR, which was shot on 16 millimeter handheld film cameras, that are super grainy? And
I actually just, I was in the room for a session for a film of that era that was shot like that, and the director and the editor sat back after they hadn't seen HDR at all up until that point. I was just in the room as a spectator, and within the first 10 minutes, they said, "Can you stop?" to the person who was playing down, and they said, "Why does it look this way?"
it looked wrong.
It looked, well, it was enhanced. HDR is an enhanced viewing experience. And one of the things that, I myself as someone who's implementing HDR is learning is that you have to really gauge what the content is, and you have to really think about the story you're telling. I was working with a cinematographer, and we had done an SDR pass to projection, and we were going in to do the HDR pass, and it was the first time he was using it, and he was like, "Oh, let's do this, let's tweak the highlights, do this," and we played for like almost a whole day. We came in the next day, and he goes, "Okay, so now let's make it look the way it's supposed to look." And we went back and we regraded the HDR, the first reel that we did, back down to a lower light level that had the fidelity more, or the texture and the feel of cinema. And you still have the added, that's the beauty of HDR, you still have the added amount of low-level light and high-level light, so you can create that viewing experience at a low level that feels cinematic, but you can also, at a point that you need to, peak the highlights to give you something special that you really want out of it. And the latitude and the creativity it gives you is, in my opinion, the best we've had so far.
Actually, a follow-up question I was going to ask you is, are the tools there yet? Or are they still a lot of work to be done?
No. I mean, well, so I grade on a system called Baselight. It's a film light product. And they recently just came out with a grading tool that's specifically designed for HDR. So you're able to not to get too techie, but you're able to grab higher levels of light or lower levels of light in very specific ways so that you can boost them up or bring them down and really grade those finer areas that HDR is giving you.
Right.
And that combined with ACES, the Academy Color Encoding System, really streamlines the process for both SDR and HDR delivery.
Yeah. I think we have to pay like an ACES trademark every time we say that out loud.
ACES.
So I think we now owe them for 3.
Yeah.
I won't say. Don't say it again.
Don't say it. Yeah.
So that's great. So Justin, talk a little bit about, there used to be this notion of a 4K tax, right? Because it was 4 times the data and as HD. Do you still see that as a huge barrier, or has it kind of evened out?
I would say it's not a huge barrier for most shows. We still find it in some talk show style shows where there's a control room. The control rooms around the US at least have not been upgraded to the full capacity that 4K is truly supported, I would say. But on more run and gun style shoots where there's just one camera or a couple cameras, the tax isn't that big. We do find it can be more expensive. One of the shows I do is Ultimate Beastmaster. There's 87 4K cameras. So the tax there is significant just on the volume of storage.
Data.
But storage is coming down, data is coming down, the cost for that at a pretty quick pace. So the hope is that as other technologies that allow HDR to happen, the 4K tax will also come down as well.
Yeah. Zach, do you agree with that?
We're actually doing a pretty large feature for you guys right now, and they're shooting on very large format cameras, and
Higher than 4K, I think, right?
yeah, that's right. And there is a significant tax that's not necessarily that we're working out, because the throughput required to turn around dailies, for example, is significant. Not just in terms of like how much storage do we fill up, but how fast can we process it.
Just the compute time of crunching those numbers.
The compute time is significant, and there's significant cost associated with the difference between that format and doing even a standard 4K format or something less, and the director's desire and need to be able to see the dailies in record time in a remote location, and then how do you distribute? That's part of it, and then how do you distribute that to everybody that needs to see it?
Yeah.
And I think part of it is not so much like how much exactly does it cost, but how do we really collaborate, which you guys are really good at actually in your engineering team.
Thank you.
To everyone work together towards trying to achieve it, rather than, well, you guys have to do this and it costs so much, you got to eat nothing. It's more about how do we like really educate everybody so that it's a collaboration to get it done in a way that ultimately has to serve really the director and the cinematographer, so that so they can see what they need to in real time.
Okay.
I would say too, like when I mentioned that it was not a big uptick, my big uptick was in comparison to the show's budget, not necessarily an uptick in what you're doing.
Right,
so the
right.
idea, definitely on the pro
Exactly.
side, there's certainly an uptick in processing 8K footage
That's right.
as fast as possible. But overall, I don't see it being a barrier to entry to do 4K as a whole.
I think people don't always realize though how widespread the impact of making these decisions could be. So I know that even on like some of our shows, if it's going to be in 4K, the detail in the costumes now all of a sudden has to be a little
That's
bit greater. Detail on the sets, and so really it doesn't just affect post-production or the camera package, or it's kind of there's a little bit of layer of impact across the entire production process.
Well, that's kind of what you were talking about with being like first in, and being the first people to adapt it and stuff like that. You start to learn those processes and what shows and what doesn't show and those types of things. And it's really about managing expectations at that point, right? It's saying, well, this is the type of show you want, this is the type of footage you're going to shoot, and this is when you're going to get your dailies. Well, kind of, or that type of thing, and it's really, that's where being on the forefront of these things really helps.
Yeah.
And being able to explain it.
Yeah, I would say part of the barrier to entry too is, and the tax that we pay is the education that Zach mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a combination of educating everybody about it.
Yeah.
And the more we learn, the more we can educate everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, we have my group and then another group within Netflix that's our whole job, is just to kind of teach and educate and put on events and negotiate with the tool sets to make sure that you have things like power windows and Baselight. You're welcome, by the way. And so I'd like to claim that, but I can't. But anyways, we do those things to make sure that that you guys are successful. Because ultimately, you know, I sort of say that, you know, a lot of Netflix is like an aircraft carrier, right? So there's 3,000 people on an aircraft carrier, and their job is to support, you know, 35 pilots that fly off the aircraft carrier. That's the whole reason the aircraft carrier exists. So everybody who cooks meals for the pilots and refuels the airplanes and fixes the airplanes and puts bombs on them and, you know, and does all that stuff, that's all, you know, Netflix exists to support the creative community to fly the airplanes. And in this case, flying the airplanes is making great content that people are going to love on our service. And so I think that that's a big part of what we do. And I like to think that we do it probably better than a lot of other folks, but hopefully everybody is doing their part and carrying some of that water.
Yeah, I mean, you guys definitely support pretty well, like all the initiatives and the education. I just recently had we were delivering an episode and we had a different bumper, and we called you guys. We were like, hey, we need the correct HDR bumper, and it like came immediately with the correct in the correct color space.
Yeah, right.
And it was awesome. It just happened for us.
Good,
and
good.
that's really nice.
So just really quick, we only have a couple minutes, so I have kind of a speed round, which I'll just go right down the line. So Manuel, what was your first reaction when you saw HDR? Just your visceral, like, quick reaction.
Well, I was just amazed how three-dimensional it felt. Even if I was looking at a two-dimensional image right next to the SDR one, you know, you accept SDR, but we used to accept VHS tapes as well, you know, to view a content.
Yeah.
So I think, there's my first gut reaction was like, oh, highlights can get really bright, so you know, let's pay attention to those. But in general, it was like I just felt it was so much more immersive, and it was kind of like a window into reality almost. It didn't feel like an artifact.
Right. Zach?
I would say it was similar to the way that we felt about Atmos. It was that we saw all of a sudden here was new fertile ground, and that's how we felt about HDR. And we saw, we're like, okay, this is a really, you know, another sort of tool set that we're going to get to play with. It won't always be something that we maximize in the way that everyone thinks about, but we embraced it readily.
Okay, Michael?
First time I ever saw HDR, it took me a week to get over the sunburn. No, I'll tell you, the first time I ever saw HDR was not a good experience. I was down at a studio, and I won't tell you what it was, but the movie was Spider-Man, and had been shot on film, and they had done an HDR pass in the early days of it, and it just looked terrible. And so I didn't have a very good reaction to it at first. But you know, as the technologies sort of progressed and tools have gotten better, and I think colorists have understood better on how to work with it, it's spectacular now. Yeah.
Yeah. Justin?
My first reaction was finally something that somebody's doing different that I haven't seen in a while. We've been doing HD and 4K, and like it's great to work in the SDR, but as soon as you see that HDR, it just hits you. You're like, wow, this is what I want. And to Michael's point, you know, if it's done correctly, it can be really good. If it's done incorrectly, there's still a learning curve. Just because you can push it this bright doesn't mean you should, but it gives you the creative freedom to do what you need to do to make it the best possible.
Yeah. Anthony?
Just that it's a game changer. That it changed. It's going to change how everyone watches television or content in general. And that the second I saw it, I was like, wow, everything's going to change from here on out. Like, this is how we're going to be grading. This is how we're going to be viewing content, and it's happening now. So.
But by just a quick show of hands, how many people in their house have an HDR TV on this panel? The two creative guys, we're going to send you one.
We're too busy in dark rooms to watch television at home.
That's probably true, actually, right? The last thing you want to do is go home. It's like a lifeguard going for a swim at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
So again, just very quick speed round. We only have a couple more minutes, like 3 more minutes. So what are kind of your final thoughts on how to best bring this to creatives that haven't experienced it in the past? Like how do you communicate to people that you think it's what's right for the story, or it's what's the right experience for the content? I'll start with you, Manuel.
Well, I think you just have to explore it. You just have to see it in order to get an idea of what it is. And as Michael has mentioned, yes, it can look that the brights can be sometimes really scary, almost blinding. But I think that over the course of the years, and it's been 2 years now that I've been doing HDR, it changed a lot, and it's gotten really a lot better, and I can fully stand behind it. At the beginning, yes, it was new, it was good, but in some instances it wasn't. It just was wrong. But that's gotten a lot better. I mean, no, people have to see it, and best probably side by side. And get used to it, and really fully, immerse yourself into both images. And then after a while, I guarantee that after a while, you look at the SDR image, and it looks like a cardboard painting, as opposed to a window into the world.
Yeah, Zach.
Yeah, similar. We had a director come the other day who, in a similar way, wanted to discuss whether or not they were going to do some sort of film grain treatment. And we had a 3-hour discussion about it, and then finally we said, look, you have to put it up on the screen. And I think that's what Manuel is saying, is, picture's worth 1,000 words.
Seeing is believing.
Seeing is, it's believing, or at least it's understanding. You may put up and say, it's terrific, but it's not right for this story, the cinematographer may say. But I think you have to see it, and you have to actually play with it. And you actually also play with it on the show or the feature film that you're talking about. It doesn't just work to use any footage. We really said, it'd be great to get something back from the HMU test or some testing that you're doing on this particular show, because it really does play differently depending on the actual creative.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, I think in some respects, our children will look at HDR, because that will become the norm, as something that looks modern and contemporary. And anything that was manufactured before that will look like what we see as 4:3 or even black and white stuff. Our kids will see it as a contemporary thing and look at anything else as dated.
Yeah. Justin, how do you think is the best way to bring it to people?
I mean, the same, to reiterate, it's just seeing is believing is truly the mantra that I have. We have had multiple shows where creatives on both sides didn't necessarily want to do it or consider doing it. They saw it, at least at the facility, then I was like, hey, ship me what you just did. And then I showed my creatives at Netflix, and it was a no-brainer. So as soon as you see it, I just don't know anybody who's going to see it, and if it's done correctly, and say no to it.
Yeah, I've heard that you can't unsee it.
You can't. You really, and if you watch SDR afterward, you almost have to go for a walk around the block and readjust your eyes to see what, so you're not like, why does that look like crap? Like I just spent all this time on the HDR pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for the general public, I would say you definitely just show it to them. But as for creatives, I definitely think it's a delicate process of showing them in the right environment with the right footage graded for their project. Because I've had creatives come in and see something and it's too pushed or too something, and they immediately try and shut it down.
Yeah.
So definitely it has to go to the story.
Yeah, one of the other things that I've had conversations with is that some of these TVs, particularly 10-foot device TVs, they're actually going to kind of do HDR automatically anyway. Yeah. And so I always make the argument of, wouldn't it be better for a person like you to be making those decisions of where things should be bright and where they shouldn't be, rather than some algorithm that's done on a chip that was put on a TV for 90 cents or whatever,
I totally agree.
Yeah, and so it's just a kind of a investment in having the right person, because color is another character in a movie or a TV, or and so I think that it's probably better for a person who's versed in using color as a tool to make those decisions than to have it be done algorithmically. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah. So with that, I say thank you all for chatting a little bit and talking about how we bring new technologies to the storytelling process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.